herren, cari amici Paneuropei, spoštovani gostje, sveikinu, dear friends of the Pan-European movement. The dream of a unified European state from the beginning of the 20th century has brought us here together more than 90 years later, but still with the same dream to build a better future for us all. The European Union of today is far from a dream organization, but until we have a dream, we can still follow the reflection of a perfect order in an old continent. The Slovenian Pan-European movement proudly announces that this is just the first out of 4 conferences that will take place this and the following year. Supported by Europe for Citizen program of European Union, we will have another 4 conferences in Trieste and in Ljubljana. I will kindly ask Mr. Gerhard Zeiler, Deputy Director of the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, to join me on the stage for the opening speech. I will also take this opportunity to thank Diplomatic Academy for hosting us in their beautiful palace. Please welcome Mr. Gerhard Zeiler.
Good evening. Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure, dear Secretary General, dear President, dear ambassadors, to welcome you at the Diplomatic Academy here in Vienna, and particularly in my capacity as Deputy Director, I think it's really an appropriate venue for the for the European Citizens for European Foreign Policy conference to take place here in Vienna. When, as you all know, in 92-93, it was in Vienna that was published the Manifesto of Coudenhove-Kalergi, and now, almost one century later, I think a lot was done, but a lot remains to be done. If you put to speak in let's say the modern social media language, as everybody from us now has kind of the pressure, instruction, or will to use Facebook, Twitter, Vimeo, Flick, video, anything. If you put the word Europe, for example, in Google, then you get 1.5 million hits. If you point unified Europe, then you get only 280,000 ones, which is on the one side a lot, but on the other side a fraction. And I think that the people who adhered to this idea of Pan-Europe and the movement they had, of course, they had their ups and downs, but they could maybe build up from a lot less 90 years ago as the 280,000 ones, but they moved it already to many more participants. And I'm particularly pleased that the president of the, let's say, Slovenian branch of this movement is also a lecturer of the academy. So he will teach our future young leaders maybe also something of the concept of the values and the concept of the Pan-European Union. And as he told me, this is only the beginning of a project that the Slovenian branch has now started. And I hope that this will several years successful project. I thank, of course, the participants, particularly Secretary General, that you had the will and you're honoring this conference with your contribution. Having said that, I wish you all a very interesting conference. I understand tomorrow You have people like the former Vice Chancellor of Austria, Gerhard to speak, who was I think one of the very important and main contributors in the 90s to the, let's say, at least from the Austrian perspective, project of entering the European Union. And I could only add from my personal point of view, it's with all the Euroscepticism and all the Euro criticism, if I talk to my two daughters who are now 12 and 14 years old, and I would tell them, for example, when we drove by car from Lisbon to Vienna, that we would have to change money 6 times, and we would have to have border controls maybe also 6 times. They would not even believe it. They would laugh at me and said, I mean, how could you be that fully to do that? How could you be this kind of this kind of separation that kept Europe for so much time? But I think it's also important that if you look at the younger generation, and I remember I did a lot of in the run-up of the European Parliament election a couple of years ago, when for the first time 16-year-old people had the right to vote. I was together with a senior colleague from the ministry going to 20-30 schools in Austria to drum up support, motivation to participate, active participation in the European idea and in the European elections. I realized maybe the benefit was more on my side than on their side, because I realized that we have, of course, to add to this narrative that 70 years of no war between, I mean, of course, Balkans we could then discuss. We have to add to this peace narrative. We have to add the economic, the moral, plus the practical, and the particularly the narrative, the future narrative. I think we have to emphasize this as well, and I think the Pan-European movement is a way to participate beyond kind of just putting United Europe in Google. Thank you again, and I would invite President HABSBURG to address the auditorium also with a few welcome remarks, please.
Chairwoman, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me thank you, the organizers especially, for having this forum today, having this international conference today, because I really think if we look at the topic, it shows us immediately, it kind of throws us immediately into some questions which are rather difficult to be answered. And that starts when we look at the title and we see what is a European citizen. That might legally be something which is rather simple, but when we start to dive into the details, it's getting rather tricky. I just heard before, you know, from the example of some Hungarian citizens that are living in Serbia, which have no voting rights when it comes to elections within the European Union. Is that European citizenship? How does that work? If we are thinking about the UK citizens that are living in Gibraltar, which also cannot vote for, let's say, the European elections, where's the European citizenship? We have to think about this even within the European Union. And the other part of the topic is the foreign policy. What is for us foreign policy anymore? I mean, it used to be a very clear thing. It was the interaction between nations. What is it nowadays? It has gone far beyond that. When we are talking about negotiating with Zambia and Tuvalu and Paraguay, it becomes a rather clear thing. But the closer we get back to our home continent, the more difficult it actually gets. Within the European Union, is it foreign policy? Well, nobody considers it that anymore. But then we have those states that are in a transitory situation coming into the European Union. What is their situation? Is this foreign policy? Well, technically, probably yes. But we shouldn't treat it that way because we are talking of a greater Europe. So we have to really ask ourselves the question on how does that work? And I'm quite sure we're going to get, hopefully, quite some answers on that over the course of this conference. I think foreign policy, to say one further word to that, is probably, when it comes to the United States, something which is a bit more simplistic than when you look into Europe. I mean, United States are instilled with a sense of missionary ideas, missionary ideals, really imposing their values on everybody else in the world, and they can take it or they have a trouble. We have seen this in the last couple of weeks in a rather strong sense when we are looking at the situation at what was happening in Syria, and my work currently lies mainly in Syria, so I could see what the effect of that sort of foreign policy is. And then we are looking in the same way what European foreign policy is there, and I have to say that probably what comes too much from the side of the United States maybe comes too little from the sides when we are looking on how European Union is actually acting in that way. And we can see that actually how big continents are acting, and that is still something that leaves a lot of room to debate and to think about. I would like to thank you very much for your kind first words, also when you mentioned, the history of the Pan-European movement and how long we have been active trying to formulate or to help to be part of formulation. What is Europe, but also what is European foreign policy? Where should Europe go? And of course, yes, in those 90 years, we had lots of ups and downs in that movement, but also within Europe and in the work that we are doing. Currently, we know that we are not looking overly optimistic at developments when we are looking on what's happening in the the development of what Europe is looking like. We have the economic problems, we have institutional problems, but I think one area where we, and now I'm talking particularly when I'm saying we as Pan-Europeans really have to work on, is the fact that we have created institutions that have a future. They are the most modern institutions in the world. There is no question about that. We have things like a European Court of Justice. We have institutions that go far beyond national institutions. So there, a lot of it has been done. Where actually it is lacking quite now is the sense of European identity. And I think that is of the greatest importance, that we are trying to work back on the question, how can we fill that, let's say, skeleton that exists with the institutions with the necessary muscle of knowing what our own identity is. And once we have found that identity, and I think Pan-Europeans have a pretty good grasp of what the European identity is, but once we are able to kind of put this identity back as a muscle to where it has to be, where it is able to move that skeleton, then I think Europe will also be able to kind of speak with one voice, be able to kind of move as a continent that has a real saying in this, our world of the future. And I really hope that this conference will definitely help us for a better understanding, for a further step on this way to this Europe that has the right muscle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. KARL HABSBURG. And now please join me in welcoming our most distinguished guest, the Secretary General of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Mr. LAMBERTO ZANNIER. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation to join you this evening for this debate. As I look at the Pan-European movement and what it stands for, I'm very happy to be here because I think it stands for ideas and values that I, throughout my also professional career, have been sharing and supporting. So I'm happy, even though I'm here now from a different angle. I'm here representing a different organization, a wider organization that might be called Pan-European in certain ways, and Pan-European and beyond. We have a transatlantic link and Eurasian link, but perhaps, as I will explain to you in a minute, that's how things are developing. We start more and more having to be looking beyond our borders, because some of the challenges, some of the issues we deal with stretch beyond our societies and our immediate reach. I'm looking at the EU from, well, first of all, from my personal experience. Perhaps one of my few periods in my career, which has been a diplomatic career spent mainly with international organizations of one nature or another, with the UN, with NATO, with the OSCE. But I've also been dealing and being involved very deeply in EU affairs. I've been European correspondent for Italy. I've been the person in charge for the coordination of European foreign policy and defense issues. And so I was very much in the mechanics, if you want, of this process at the time of Lisbon, so at a time of great transformations. And now, from my position, I see the EU in action from yet a different angle, because I've seen it in action from inside and from outside, from different perspectives in the course of the years. And perhaps from this perspective, I can share with you my consideration how I see the EU developing, how I see the EU performing, and where I see strengths and weaknesses. First of all, also to clarify at the beginning where the EU stands in relation to the OSCE. The EU is in a way, progressively, and especially after Lisbon, a single actor within the OSCE, and is acting as such. The EU is a strong supporter of the OSCE. The EU contributes to 70% of the budget of our organization, and is in many ways influencing in very substantial ways our policies in the organization. The body of norms, commitments that are the foundation of the OSCE and of the comprehensive approach to security of the OSCE. I imagine you will be familiar with that three-dimension, political, military area, economic, environmental field, and the human dimension, human and democratic institution building. It regroups a number of commitments and values that are strongly supported by EU countries, which, however, does not mean that the EU is immune from scrutiny. We're looking into how EU countries deliver in terms of these commitments, like we do for everybody else. So there is no free ride in a way, also for the EU within the OSCE. But the EU, as I say, is increasingly one part and one actor within the organization. It uses the OSCE to project its policies and to achieve its priorities in its foreign policy area. We see the EU in different modes. We see the EU as an actor within the organization, but we see the EU also as a partner organization with which we develop institutional relations, and we see the EU also as a partner on the ground, where we cooperate on specific programs and specific projects. And we have different modes of operation with the EU in the three elements that I described. First of all, the EU within the OSCE. There is traditionally a strong caucus of the EU. EU heads of mission spend a lot of time among themselves consulting. Actually, sometimes this has been criticized by other players because of the length of this process and the effort that is required. And sometimes the EU comes across as a little bit of OSCE within the OSCE, because it tends to come out of their own consultations with the lowest common denominator. So that's already one area where the EU should look at how to improve its own performance. And I'm obviously very open in discussing this with the colleagues in Brussels. I obviously have regular meetings with all key interlocutors over there. Every 6 months I brief the PSC. I had regular meeting with Ashton, Barroso, Van Rompuy. With FURLAN we met a week ago, and then we have regular consultations. So certainly the dynamics are there, and they're very positive in many ways, because, as I say, the EU is really very much part of what we do. But there is a certain rigidity in the way the EU is developing its own foreign policy, due, of course, to some of the internal dynamics of this and different models of engagement within different organizations. Within the OSCE, the EU tends to treat the OSCE as it treats the UN. It tends to come up with statements about issues, whereas the OSCE is centered on dialogue. So we want to have exchanges about current issues all the time, and the EU tends to put forward the position And then if there is a debate about that, they need to caucus again to figure out how to react to that position. So it's very much work in progress. It's a bit slow, but it's the way it is developing, and this development is certainly a positive challenge for EU ambassadors in the OSCE. In terms of the interinstitutional relations, they have developed quite a bit over time. We are talking about possibly opening an office of the OSCE in Brussels to be also more present in a way in the planning phase of projects of the European Union, and to increase our interaction on the ground. Interaction on the ground is obviously extremely positive, and it has improved since the establishment of the External Action Service. The delegations which have brought, and again that's a very personal impression, but a much more political perspective in the work of and the role of the EU on the ground. So the delegations now manage much better to bring together the political agenda of the European Union and couple it with the programmatic area and the programs on the work on the ground. Whereas when these were simply representation of the Commission, the technical side tended to prevail. So certainly there has been quite a remarkable progress in that on that side, and that is making also our engagement much better. As we look at the OSCE and the way the OSCE operates on the ground, I see different dynamics in different areas. So if you look at Southeast Europe, for instance, in Southeast Europe we have generally, and the Western, I'm talking about the Western Balkans, which is where we have our field operations. There is a dynamic of accession to the European Union, which applies generally to the whole region, of course with difficulties and differences here and there. The EU has played an extremely positive role in recent months on this dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina, and this is one area where the OSCE is operationally involved, because we will be there to implement on the side of the municipal elections in Belgrade this agreement, and we see how complicated it is also on the implementation side every day, including today. We have hiccups and it's ups and downs, and we're never sure where we stand and how we are moving towards this positive result. But without the engagement of the EU up front, we would have not been where we are today. So this is really making a difference. And so this partnerships becomes natural in a way. What we bring as the OSCE, and this is one of the main differences in the nature of the organization, we do not, in the OSCE, have a core shared political agenda or a common defense agenda as the EU has. This is what also keeps the EU together. The common vision and the common objectives and the common way of looking at things, which they project in the OSCE, with obviously the differences which create these problems sometimes in having an advanced position because of different perceptions depending on where you sit within the EU. But the OSCE, to the contrary, is a framework within which we take it for granted that countries who sit there have very different security perceptions, have very different political agendas. We have the United States, we have Russia, we have Turkey, we have the EU, as I say, and a number of others, including smaller countries involved in conflict situations whose political agenda is really focused on solving that specific conflict, and for which that's where we find also a good interaction with the EU in terms of addressing these issues within the agenda of the OSCE, and in coupling the political engagement with the support for specific activities, specific projects that do make a difference and that do contribute with the leverage to solving these issues. So as I'm saying, this is something that is very visible in the Western Balkans, where obviously the objective of the OSCE is not to advance accession to the EU as such. That's a job for the EU. But the objective of the OSCE is to advance the development of the institutions in this area, and to work with the countries in moving towards whatever their own strategic objectives are, and they happen to coincide with the strategic objectives of the EU. So in fact, this is de facto aligning our agendas, and the work that we do is a work that the EU considers very beneficial for its own purposes. That's why last year I was in Zagreb. We closed our mission after 15 years. our mission to Zagreb at the time of the accession of Croatia to the European Union. And this was considered to be a success, of course, for Croatia, for the EU, but also for the OSCE, whose work had resulted in moving Croatia at a different stage in their own foreign policy ambitions. And in this sense, we continue working in Southeast Europe. But if we move more eastwards, the situation changes, of course. The area which we call as Eastern Europe within the OSCE, which is Ukraine, the South Caucasus and Moldova, it's an area which is now very much in the focus of the EU, of the Eastern Partnership. As we are moving towards preparing our own ministerial council in Kiev at the end of the year, we do realize that there's a lot of focus on Vilnius. And in fact, that's the key event. And Kiev, in fact, and we see the complementarity between the events, Kiev can become an event subject to whatever will be the discussions in Vilnius and the conclusions of the decisions in Vilnius, but it can become an event that will help dispelling the impression that Vilnius is about drawing new lines, or new dividing lines. I think what we need to convey is a notion that developing cooperation and deepening cooperation between the EU and other partners is exactly in line with the idea of creating a common security and a security space in the broader OSCE way of seeing things, so including the economic dimension, etc., from Vancouver to Vladivostok. So it's another step forward on a path that is not ending there. But it's really about opening new bridges and opening new avenues of cooperation. And obviously it is challenging because not everybody obviously shares that vision, and that's where the difficulty comes. But if we didn't have the difficulty, we would need organizations like ours that do work on building bridges and trying to overcoming legacies of the past. One of the big issues we have on the agenda of our organization is fostering reconciliation in relation to conflicts. But there is also a larger side of reconciliation, the reconciliation from the Cold War, and the East-West still feelings that are still there in many areas, and that they are still complicating relations with countries in this East-West mode. This is actually one of the fields in which we are advancing our work. We're trying to redefine security today. And from an OSCE perspective, we are finding that security is much more complicated today. In a way, at the time of the Cold War, it was relatively easy to see what the dangers were and the direction in which we had to move and what the challenges, albeit huge, were. Today, security is much more magmatic. It's difficult to define. In the OSCE, we see this residual East-West set of issues in a way, post-Cold War, and the need to complete the work on addressing conflicts that are still there, the need to advance on reconciliation and on opening bridges in Europe, the need to support processes of integration as the EU process, and the need to complete the work on democratic transition, if you want, in that mode. But then we see that our neighborhood has an impact on our security. Just look at the Arab Spring, look at Afghanistan or Iran or North Korea or wherever. If you look at the borders of the OSCE, you have quite a problematic neighborhood. So more and more we're looking for ways to deal with that, and the EU is a primary partner in that kind of dialogue. And the third dimension of security that we're discovering is the global security. Challenges like terrorism or trafficking or climate change or issues related to organized crime are broader issues where nobody really alone can make a difference. No individual country, no individual organization. We need to build coalitions. We need to build broad coalitions and to have an inclusive discussion with all relevant actors. And here again, the EU is the forefront of the debate internally to develop strategies that are broad, that encompass everybody, that are inclusive, so including also some of the other key partners for the organization. So very much an agenda of ongoing activities and then the rich plan of work. But a plan of work where the EU is demonstrating still today, and with their own internal difficulties and with the constraints that I was mentioning earlier, great dynamism and great impact of the activities of our organization. So thank you very much, and very happy to be here.
Thank you, Mr. ZANNIER. Before I leave the stage to our next speaker, I would just like to send best regards from the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of the Slovak Republic, Miroslav Lajčák. We're very sorry that Mr. Lajčák couldn't come, but we have the great privilege to welcome here the Slovak delegation. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our next guest speaker, the Ambassador at Large of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, ŠARūNAS ADOMAVIČIUS. Welcome.
Grüß Gott, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, ladies and gentlemen, labas vakaras. Let me begin by thanking Mr. LARIS GAISER, President of the Slovenian Paneuropean movement, and also Ambassador Dr. Hans Winkler, Director of the Diplomatic Academy in Vienna, for this kind invitation to be this evening together with you. It's nice to return to Vienna, where I spent almost 5 years working as the permanent representative of the Republic of Lithuania to the OSCE. Also, I would like to say to you that 1 year ago I came back from Podgorica, where I spent 2 years as a head of the OSCE mission to Montenegro. It is a privilege for me to address such an honorable audience, and I consider it very significant and symbolic that we talk about the unity of the Europe and EU citizens' influence on European foreign policy during the European Year of the Citizens. This year was declared the European Year of Citizens to encourage dialogue between EU institutions and civil society at events and conferences around Europe to discuss EU rights and build a vision of how the EU should be in the future. The citizens of EU should ask themselves a question: what kind of EU we all want? Certainly, we would get an incredible amount of different answers. However, I am sure we would all agree that we want a Europe that is credible, growing, and open. It is no coincidence that these words refer also to the priorities of Lithuanian EU Council presidency. We need to keep building a Europe that is credible to its citizens and the world. A Europe that grows its economy and offers jobs. A Europe that remains open to its partners and neighbors. The Paneuropean idea, grounded on liberal democratic values as well as the determination and activeness of strong-minded Europeans, such as Otto von Habsburg, one of the architects of the European idea and European integration, its driving force in achieving this vision of Europe, especially when talking about the openness of the EU. Let me say that one of the important dimensions of EU openness is Eastern Partnership policy. Secretary General mentioned. Naturally, Lithuania has chosen is one of the presidency priorities, and the goal of bringing closer Eastern partners to the EU is highlighted during the Lithuanian EU Council presidency. There are high expectations that Vilnius summit in November will see the signing of the association agreement with Ukraine, as well as the initiation of the relevant agreements with Moldova and Georgia, aiming to sign them in 2014. These partners who have made their European choice must know that they are very welcome when they are ready to join our family. Ladies and gentlemen, to be here and to be influential in the international area requires having a strong orientation for common values. Let me remember that this summer in Brussels, the President of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, together with the leaders of the Baltic states, representative of the European Commission, opened the Baltic Way Alley next to the European Parliament building as a symbol of freedom. 25 years ago, more than 2 million people from occupied Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania joined their hands in a live human chain through all these states, the Baltic Way. By doing this, they have expressed their will and determination to restore their independence. This was a powerful political manifesto of the civil society, demonstrating how the will of citizens may pave the way for important international political changes and decisions. Proceeding to a discussion of the present-day situation, let me underline that European citizens have wide possibilities to influence the foreign policy field. Firstly, of course, by directly elected parliamentarians. The forthcoming European Parliament elections in May 2014 are an opportunity for the civil society to mobilize and express their will. But not less important are other indirect tools. The Lisbon Treaty introduced the European Citizens Initiative, which is designated to make European democracy more direct by allowing citizens to propose legal acts to the Commission on matters where the EU has competence to legislate. I strongly believe that this tool will contribute to the development of the European public sphere, since it's supposed to encourage citizens to participate in the European political debate and provide them with a new possibility to make an impact on the European foreign policy. Additionally, any European citizen may express her position and influence the European policies by submitting a petition to a European Parliament on a subject that affects her directly. The civil society organizations may also contribute to European policy making by providing information and analysis to the public consultations. Moreover, considering that 2013 is the European Year of Citizens, the Lithuanian presidency, by organizing a number of events, has already taken steps to contribute to wider involvement of the EU citizens into debates on European policies and raise public awareness about common EU values, as well as citizens' rights arising from their EU citizenship. At the end of this year, on 12th and 13th of December, in Vilnius, Lithuania, together with the EU Commission and the European Year of Citizens Alliance, are organizing the European Non-Governmental Organization Conference event. I am convinced that this international NGO forum in Vilnius will be an excellent opportunity to take discussions further and achieve remarkable results that would lead to making every year the year of the citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, Lithuania had always sought to make Europe more credible, to strengthen its voice in the global arena, and we need efforts from all Europeans to make it happen. We need smart solutions and more cooperation among member states, among different European regions to secure a promising future for the EU citizens. As Lithuania holds the EU presidency this half year, it also holds a responsibility for the openness, credibility, political and economic stability of the EU, a community that unites us all. This event that gather international academic community, Pan-European movement, is a great opportunity for further the development of the Pan-European idea. Together we are building a strong European family that is creative and harmonious. A family where different voices do not overpower, but support and encourage each other. Thank you.
Your thoughts
thoughts and ideas. And now I have the privilege to welcome the Director General for Bilateral Relations and European Affairs from Slovenian Ministry for Foreign Affairs, TADEJ, RUPEL. Welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm really honored to participate on this international conference organized by the Pan-European movement, of course, organized and hosted by Diplomatic Academy, which of course is just a very big proud on its long history, strived to for formation of its students, professionals, and of course decision makers, and since its foundations. And I think that they are prepared, you're preparing them for multiple challenges we are facing today. I would like to, of course, connect to today's challenge we are facing in this conference, which is, of course, the bringing European citizens to a center of the EU and, of course, to its policies. Of course, the challenge is more valid since we are heading towards the European parliamentary elections next year, and of course in the year of the European citizens, European Year of the Citizen is also a very important moment for this topic. As I mentioned, the European parliamentary elections is a very important breaking point as we see it. Of course, choosing the future model of the European Union, of course, and its citizens. The main point of concern is avoid ending up with the European Union, which is rather even more detached from its citizens than it is now. We have, of course, the responsibility to contest the Euroscepticism, which is on the rise. Renationalization, I mean the nationalistic movements, and of course to bridge the indifferences in the social and other spheres of the society of the European Union. We have to, of course, strengthen the positive elements of each policy, which is already established through the mechanisms of the European Union. Maybe let me share some thoughts on the role of the European citizens for European foreign policy, which will put forward the discussions probably in the next tomorrow after this opening session. I would, of course, like to bind two scopes, which are external and internal value-based actions of the European Union. Of course, European Union foreign policy is specific and is subject to specific rules and procedures compared to other policies. And this, of course, that does not render less efficiency of the foreign policy of the EU in pursuing its objectives, of course, which stayed firm through EU existence, which are, of course, promoting peace, stability, prosperity, security for its citizens. The outperformance of the EU in the past awards it with Nobel Prize last year, so it has some kind of good foundation. Lisbon Treaty was mentioned also today. I think Lisbon Treaty brought some institutional changes. If I connect with the foreign policy of EU, it established the European Action External Service, which of course consolidate the EU efforts in this regard. But EU achievements in the past should give Europeans also some kind of self-confidence, which of course not only because we managed to build peace and peaceful and prosperous society, but also because of the concept of the European regional integration model called enlargement, and which of course exercise its influence well beyond its borders. Against this background, Europeans are invited to find more strength to mirror EU values also at home, the values which we usually promote through the external actions. I don't know, I don't need to go into the details what are these values, but we think that we must squeeze the oxygen out of the room where populism and nationalism is present. Those ideas which are present now throughout Europe, of course, clearly rides on the waves of the economic and financial crisis. Only with the consistency of our external and internal endeavors of the EU will give EU more weight on a global scene. Maybe to touch upon the fiscal and financial crisis and fiscal tightening in European Union. Of course, I think that it should not serve as a pretext for concentration of predominantly on the internal consolidation. Despite we allocate only 6% of our budget for the next financial perspective 14-20 for the heading called Global Europe, we have to stick to those resources and remain open and make headway in areas where we can make real differences in the global scene. To name some, I would like to mention, of course, the trade deals, which of course will bring and promote growth and jobs, and make progress in the energy policy and promote agenda on the climate change. Maybe I would like, as a Slovenian, to present some angle how do we see that we can integrate citizens into the foreign policy activities of Slovenia. Of course, despite enumerated foreign policy priorities lying at the heart of the Slovenian diplomats and all our activities, we are trying to rebalance and to include the need for more efficient European foreign policy and Slovenian foreign policy in this regard, and service, of course, which is usually meant as a consulate or service abroad, with interest and views of the Slovenian citizens. We, for example, in Slovenia established a public day of Slovenian diplomacy. It's the 22nd of May, which gives Slovenians possibility to go behind the closed doors of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to discuss and speak with the diplomats. We also try to shape and match our best consular services that our citizens feel safe and secure abroad, and trying to present the inclusion of Slovenians into our foreign policy mechanisms. I would like just briefly to share with you how we structure our priorities in foreign policy. It is like undulating effect, like if you throw a stone into a pond, you get waves out of the center. So first priority, of course, besides strategic relations with strategic partners, is our neighbors. We would like, of course, trying to intensify cooperation and cooperate on common priorities in bilateral and in EU perspective. Of course, then we go broader to the region of the Western Balkans, which is crucial for stability, prosperity, and the democratic part has to become a very stable and democratic part of Europe as well. Then our connection to the both parts of the European neighborhood, as Slovenia lies at the outskirts of Pannonia, and on the other side, of course, part of the Mediterranean. Security and stability of both are of crucial importance. Of course, Slovenia would like also to use the leverage of the instruments which are further promote the notion of democracy as, of course, a bringer of stability, respect, and human rights. Beside that, economic prosperity and well-being is of high importance for Slovenia and regions also outside of European Union. As I mentioned, in these endeavors, we are trying to listen and, of course, include the citizens' requests as well. Let me share just the last portion of my opening remarks on the discussion of the EU future of the EU. As you know, we are in the middle of the preparations for the consolidation and bringing closer all the policies on the economic and monetary union, banking union, and other perspectives from the political consolidation and also defense and other policies. These are the topics which are discussed nowadays in the family of the EU. As Slovenians, we are trying, of course, to search the framework of our discussions within the EU with our citizens. We want, of course, to build up a political European Union through a dialogue with citizens and national parliaments. I would like just present briefly, we initiated a project called More Europe, More Slovenia. It is a series of 11 roundtable discussions throughout Slovenia up to the elections next year in the parliament, up to May 2014, which covers broad range of issues from general conception of the EU as a political union to proposed genuine economic and monetary union, social dimension, democratic legitimacy, ecology, etc. And will, of course, bring together all areas and all different interesting public to discuss the issues from academia, business, and students, and as well bloggers. We launched a special blog connection which reach the bloggers on the specific topics as well. In January 2014, in a few months' time, we will, for example, discuss the question of the EU as a global actor and a view of Slovenian citizens about it. Of course, findings of important input will be for Slovenian positions, used for Slovenian positions represented at EU level. To conclude, of course, one last thought that bringing a gap of democratic deficit and bringing the ideas, proposals, problems, ideas, etc. of our citizens into a center of our policy making is actually a never-ending exercise, but we are trying our best and trying to follow that exercise also in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Rupel. You gave us a lot of ideas to think them over. Our last speaker of today's conference is the president of the Slovenian Pan-European movement, LARIS GAISER. Welcome.
Good evening, dear General Secretary, Excellencies, Deputy Director, President. First of all, thank you very much for coming, and secondly, thank you very much for supporting us. Now, as you can see, I'm the only speaker with the water, and I have a long speech, but I change a little bit because I deliver a lesson about European foreign policy today here. It was a 3-hour lesson, and I see that a big chunk of my class is here, so I cannot charge them with another ex-cathedra lesson about EU foreign policy, and I will skip the first part, and I would like to share with you the text that I prepared during the last nights, and this is the text. Dear Pan-European friends, many people have dreamt of united Europe, but few are determined to create it. As an object of longing, it remains barren, but as an object of will, it becomes fruitful. The only force that can realize the Europe is the will of the Europeans. The only force that can prevent its realizations is, again, the will of the Europeans. Thus, into the hands of every European is given a share of the destiny of his individual world. While the rest of the world is making daily progress, Europe is steadily going downhill. This dynamism implies a program. The cause of Europe's decline is political, not biological. Europe is not dying of old age, but because its inhabitants are killing and destroying one another with the instruments of modern finance war and political egoism. As regards quality, Europe is still the most productive human reservoir in the world. The peoples of Europe are not senile. It is only their political system that is senile. So soon as the latter has been radically changed, the complete recovery of the Hellenic continent can be and must ensure. The world wars changed only the political map of Europe, not really its political mentality. Now, as before, international anarchy, oppression of the weaker by the stronger, latent war, economic disunion, and political intrigue prevail everywhere. European politics of today resemble those of yesterday, more than those of tomorrow. The eyes of Europe are turned backwards instead of forwards. The constant retrospection in the chief cause of Europe's reaction and disunion. To bring about a change of this state of affairs is a duty of Europeans, of Europe's youth. The statement of Europe refused to recognize and to give effect to this aim. They will be swept out of existence by the nations whose destinies they so lightly raped. Two burning problems weighed upon the European continent: the social question and the European question. The reckoning between the classes and reckoning between the states. The social question rightly dominates in public discussion. It creates and divides parties. It is daily being thrashed out 1,000 times by public opinion in every country. Meanwhile, the European question is not secondary to it in importance. It is not taken seriously. And yet, upon its settlement depends the future of our culture and of our children. The European question is this: can Europe, so long as it is politically and economic disunion, last, maintain its peace and independence with respect to the growing world powers, or is it bound, in order to preserve its existence, to organize itself into a real federal union? To put the question is to answer it. And that is why it is not put but barked. Although in public discussion there is much talk about European questions, there is none of the European question, in which all of them are rooted, just as the many social questions are rooted in the social question. Just as today every European is forced by internal politics to take stand in regard to the social question, so it must be forced by external politics to take a stand in regard to the European question. Then let it rest with Europeans or whatever they want, union or disunion, organization or anarchy, resurrection or downfall. One thing, however, must never again happen: the barking of a question which affects the lives of 500 million people by their responsible leaders. At least the European question must be unfolded every day before the public opinion of the continent, in its newspapers and political literature, and in its assemblies, parliaments and cabinets. Time presses. Tomorrow perhaps it may be too late for the settlement of the European question, and it is better therefore to begin today. The rapidity of the movement toward the real unification of Europe is quite as important as its existence, for it depends upon the rapidity of this movement whether Europe will be a union of states or a collection of ruins. For us, Pan-Europeans, Pan-Europe signifies self-help through the consolidation of Europe. The objection will be raised against a stronger political Europe, that is an utopia. No natural law is opposed to this realization. It harmonizes the interest of an overwhelming majority of the Europeans. It violates the interest of only a dwelling minority. This small but powerful minority, which today directs the fortune of Europe, will endeavor to brand political Europe as an utopia. To this, the reply is that every great historical happening began as an utopia and ended as a reality. In 1913, the Polish and the Czechoslovak Republic were utopians. In the 1918, they became realities. In the 1913, the Polish and in the 1960s, the victory of the communism in Russia was an utopia. In the 70s, it was an accomplished fact. In the 1945, the European communities were an utopia, but in reality, in the 50s. Slovenian independence was an utopia, as your independence, in the 80s. and was a reality in the 90s. To a politician, in an inverse proportion to his power of imagination, the realm of utopia seems greater and the realm of possibility smaller. World history has more imagination than the puppets who make it, and it is compounded of unending surprises of utopias come true. Whether an idea remains an utopia or become a reality usually depends upon the number and the energy of its supporters. While thousands believe in Pan-Europe, it is an utopia. So long as millions believe in it, it is a program. But at once 100 million believes in it, it becomes a fact. According to the future of Europe, depends upon whether the supporters have the faith of the propagandist force necessary to convince millions and to convert the utopia of yesterday into a reality of tomorrow. I call upon the youth of Europe to stop the disruptive process of Europe and to accomplish this task. Ladies and gentlemen, this test is that I share now with you is old 90 years. It has been written here in the 1923 in Vienna by Colonel Kalergi, the founder of Paneuropean. I wanted to share this text with really few small corrections in the text with you, because really I wanted to share with you the astonishing feeling that after 90 years we are still discussing today more or less the same fundamental question about Europe. The Pan-Europa Manifesto is completely updated. The forward is updated. We have our Europe, political Europe, that is completely divided. It suffered a lot in the last 3-4 years under the clashes of the speculative financial world. It fell down under these clashes. Showing no unity and local political egoism, the European Union paved the way by itself to heavy attacks and to loss of wealth in the last year. Due to its auto-referential political elites, and I believe that Europe is once again becoming a sort of land of nihilism and a land where the real politics, the good politics, are excluded. In the ancient Greece, the meaning of polis, so town, was the right town. Polis is equal to right town. The right town where everybody wants to live, where everybody is ready to sacrifice, because it's the correct way of life. The polis is, or it was in the past, the final target, the aim for everybody of the political activity of any kind of decision. In 2014, the European Union will enter in a phase of changes. Changes, parliamentary elections, and I believe that these parliamentary elections must bring together also a needed period of reflection. We need a new pact between the citizens and the politics, between the citizens and the politicians. We Europeans, we would like to have our polis. We would like to have the right pan-European polis. This is the reason because why? Because we, the Pan-European movement of Slovenia, shaped the program Europe for Citizens, and we will develop this program in the next year, until the end of 2014. This is the reason because we republished the book that we will find later on outside of Pan-Europa. After 90 years, we republished the book in English. I believe that we must share this book. And let me thank here and congratulate also for the wonderful job done on this book, Igor Kovac and Aleš Lampe, that did the biggest part of this work. And this is the reason. And this is the reason also because we wanted to start here in Vienna after 90 years, because we started here in the 1943. We believe that we are dealing with our future, and we cannot remain passive. We want our democratic policy, because democracy is the only tool that we have in order to break the negative relation between money and power. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not in crisis. In crisis is the financial, or are the financial oligarchies around the world. let me quote once again in my life Otto von Habsburg. European communities were better than nothing. European Union is better than European communities. But European Union is still not Europe. So let's accomplish our task. Let's start once again from Vienna. Thank you very much.
With this last speech, we have come to an end of our first day. My great thanks go to all the guest speakers and, of course, to you all Pan-European friends. You are all now kindly invited for a dinner where we can all discuss how we, European citizens, can contribute to shape the EU foreign policy. I also kindly ask those who have not registered yet to do so. Thank you very much, enjoy your dinner, and see you tomorrow.